This is the Spycraft 101 podcast. Welcome to your clandestine classroom. This is episode number 213 of the Spycraft 101 podcast. My guest today is Reality Winner. Reality enlisted in the U.S. Air Force after high school and served as a cryptolinguist assigned to the National Security Agency, where she translated audio recordings in Pashto and Dari from Afghanistan. After her first enlistment, she was hired as a private contractor working at a different NSA facility in Augusta, Georgia. In June 2017, she was arrested after leaking a classified report to the Intercept media outlet. Her story became a media sensation, and since then she has been the subject of a 2021 documentary, as well as 2 film adaptations released in 2023 and 2024. I invited Reality onto the podcast to discuss her life, her arrest, and her incarceration, which she wrote about in her new memoir titled, I Am Not Your Enemy. Before we get into this story, I want to tell you about an educational tool you're not going to want to miss. It's the Gray Man Briefing Classified. You'll get breaking news updates from all over the world on topics including planned protests and riots, low-intensity conflicts, natural disaster alerts, cyber attacks, supply chain disruptions, and more. You'll also get access to articles that help you build your own skills, including urban survival, home security, counter-surveillance, escape and evasion techniques, and more. And this is much more than just a newsletter in your inbox. Joining the Gray Man Briefing Classified also includes invitation-only channels on the Telegram and Signal apps for convenient real-time updates. The newsletter subscription is normally $5 per month, but if you use the code GBC Spycraft, you can save 20% each month for the life of your subscription. I'm already a member myself and have been reading and learning a lot since I first subscribed. Look it up yourself at graymanbriefing.com. That's gray with an A, graymanbriefing.com. And use the discount code GBC Spycraft to save 20% right from the start. Reality, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. I've followed your story right from the start, just like a lot of other people have, but I never anticipated I would have the chance to hear about it directly from you.
Well, I'm excited to talk about this book coming out.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad I got an advance copy from the publisher and I was able to read it ahead of time. And it was, very, very eye-opening, certainly, because for the most part, people have been reading your story as it's told by others, including by the Department of Justice and the FBI, of course. So I'm glad to hear it in your own words as well. And on that note, did you have to put this through pre-publication review by Department of Justice or by NSA or anyone like that before you could actually print the book?
We did, and when I tell you it had been like an evolution of ideas from the day that we had submitted it, I think it was almost 2 years of waiting with 0 updates.
Oh, wow.
And obviously during that time, a presidential election had taken place. There were very mixed, I'm sure everybody was in despair last November, but for us, we pretty much saw that as the final nail in the coffin when Trump was elected, that the NSA would never release it. And then the NSA did. And so it was kind of like that uneasy feeling of, now we have the manuscript back. Do we release it and put another target on my back?
I see. Most of my guests, or many of them at least, have been through pre-publication review of one type or another. I know it's a very opaque process, but yours, my gosh, they had to just scrutinize it to unimaginable lengths, I'm certain. Did they come back with a lot of required changes at all, or was it like an ultimately just a yes, proceed kind of acknowledgement?
It was a yes, proceed type of situation. It kind of, we couldn't believe it, but 2 years and not even a single word redacted.
Wow, that's amazing. I would not have expected that at all, honestly. But that's good that you were able to get everything that you wanted to say on paper and then out in print now.
For the most part, yeah. Everybody fights with their editor.
I'm sure I can understand that completely. So did you have a chance to talk to any of the other well-known leakers in the past? I know that some of them did interviews in your documentary, but have you interacted with them yourself?
I had not. There was a very large chunk of this time in which I was under federal supervised release, kind of known in layman's terms as probation. Mm-hmm. And one of those stipulations is that you are not supposed to have any type of communication or contact with anybody else with a criminal record. Yeah, it keeps you pretty isolated.
Okay, yeah, I can see that, and that kind of came through a little bit in the documentary as well, which I got to see just a few weeks ago. But I know that you seem to have a huge amount of support from them and from many other people as well, because they certainly spoke up for you in public, at least. But that's kind of unfortunate that you're not able to kind of commiserate with anyone who's been through similar experiences at all.
I actually think that's by design, and not just for, government whistleblowers and leakers, but anybody that's been through prison. It's almost like a guaranteed failure, because once you get out, you can talk to a therapist, but what is the likelihood of somebody with a medical license also having a prison background? So
Hmm.
it's to keep you from feeling like you're the only person in the world that had just gone through this terrible thing and you have nobody to connect with over it.
Hmm. Yeah,
It's
I can
definitely by
totally see that.
design. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, so few people would be able to say, "I understand," what you went through, and actually mean it, and you would know that they meant it as well. That's really tough to find.
Yeah.
Dang. So can we just start like with your early life a little bit? Can you tell us about growing up and what it was that ultimately led you to join the Air Force in the first place?
Of course. I think something that I was trying to tread in the book was not necessarily playing the trauma Olympics, because we definitely were always able to maintain a stable lower middle class life. Definitely did not have the vocabulary or the awareness to even know that my father was an addict for, from the time I was born till the time he passed away in 2016. And so it was very sheltered, but not always happy. But I do know that, like, one of the most pivotal moments in my young life, in my childhood, like so many other millennials, was 9/11. Like, that was the day that, if you were not an adult at that time, like, your entire life and your perspective of the world changed. The world was no
Hmm.
longer that fun, exciting place anymore. It's kind of the way some of us even understood war for the first time. But for me personally, it oddly enough gave me something to connect with my father over. We definitely liked, not like spycraft, but like those Dan Brown novels where there were acts of like religious terrorism and it was like a giant riddle to solve.
Hmm.
And then when that happened, that's all we could ever talk about were like the philosophical, spiritual, social, and political reasons why this event happened. And that was really like the foundation of our relationship moving forward.
Oh wow. Okay. Yeah, I had not realized that at all. I mean, you like you said, you did kind of document some really difficult times, in your young life there growing up. But it's good that you were able to connect, even if it was over such a terrible thing like that. And how was your relationship by the time that he finally passed away? Like, did you stay close to him over the years after that?
I think I stayed as close to him as you can with somebody with early stages of dementia.
Oh gosh.
And that I was in my early 20s as this was progressing and kind of starting to. I didn't understand that he was a victim of the opioid epidemic until about a year before he passed away.
Hmm.
And that just reshaped almost every childhood memory that I had had of him. So going into his final year of life, where he did lose the ability to speak, and he was basically on hospice and no longer lucid, I had these really bitter revelations going on about somebody that I would never hear their side of the story from.
Hmm. Oh man.
So I had deliberately stayed away from Texas for years leading up to that point, and I had the opportunity to actually see him the day before he died, and I chose not to.
Oh man. Well, you couldn't have known at that time. I know that he was obviously in very bad shape, but I know that you could not have known what was coming in the next 24 hours or so.
Right.
Gosh, I'm sorry to hear that. Well, your having watched the documentary and read the book, I have to say your mother just comes across as an absolute angel throughout both, honestly. And I know that she was kind of your rock. Can you just talk about her a little bit, because I just could not be more impressed with her, having seen her on film and read about her as well.
Definitely. I think that my mom is just the shining example of strong womanhood. When I was growing up, she was an investigator for Child Protective Services. And my father, being unemployed and being home all the time, did allow her to turn her career into her purpose for living. And I just remember like everybody when I was growing up thought that she was like some hotshot attorney because she was always wearing the power suits and the shoulder pads and the high heels because she was always in that courtroom. And just having that example of a woman who put her career almost before everything else, I think was the most positive influence in my life. And then as I grew older and actually understood like what she did and what she saw every single day, it really inspired me as a young adult looking at their future, graduating high school. What that meant was that your career and your passion in life can be something incredibly hard and incredibly ugly, and to not be afraid of that sort of to have those aspirations. You know, everybody else kind of wanted to go into medicine, into engineering, into technology, and they had all these high hopes. And me joining the Air Force was like, I just want to listen to terrorists, you know? So I think that my father and my mother definitely kind of shaped me into kind of following a path into like a darker side of trying to fight the evil in the world, I guess.
Hmm.
And once I was locked up, I just remember like thinking that I had become somebody that she would be ashamed of. And after that first detention hearing, I had been locked up maybe 5 days. And that was when the prosecution just misrepresented everything about me to make me seem like an enemy of the state. I did not that wasn't even like my trial. That was just so I could be out on bond for a nonviolent offense. And the hopelessness I had felt, like the only response I had to that hearing was to call my mom and tell her to go back to Texas and to leave me there. Because after the things that were said in the courtroom and the fact that we were not allowed to rebut any of those statements, that powerlessness, I was just like, after those things were said, how could anybody love me?
Hmm.
And instead, she became my single most powerful advocate.
Hmm. Yeah, that certainly comes through what I've seen. And do you feel like you mentioned earlier she spent so much time in courtrooms years earlier? Did that kind of help prepare her or help steel her for seeing what you were going through? I know it was very different types of cases, of course, but she just seemed so calm and collected through everything. I was just shocked at how well she was able to kind of navigate those troubled waters.
I don't want to assume that her career history made this any easier for her, but I can definitely see the mom I remember in those power suits in the way that she would conduct interviews as her own personal response to Jenna Solari, the prosecutor, and that, you know, she was willing to get up there on the defense table with me and go line for line against her. And it really did seem that way when she took the stand at one point as a character witness for me. It
Hmm.
just, I will never forget just the look on her face when Jenna, we call her Jenna, but when prosecutor Solari had to apologize to her on record for mischaracterizing a conversation that she had with me on the phone about my financial resources.
Hmm.
And just the fact that my mother was able to get that apology out of her in that courtroom on record, that speaks to how powerful she is in a courtroom.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I can totally understand that. Gosh. So backtracking a little bit to your career, you went in as a linguist. Where did your interest in languages kind of develop? Was it already something you were pursuing in like high school, for example?
Definitely, sort of. After 9/11, I just remember that I spent a lot of times with the letter A encyclopedia, tracing maps of Afghanistan and writing the Arabic alphabet. This is so dumb. I've never actually said this to anybody before, but I just remember watching the movie The Mummy with Brendan Fraser, probably the greatest film of all time.
It really is.
And and the I don't even know, they never explained who these people were, but these desert warriors came out to help him fight the mummy. And it wasn't even real letters, but they were Arabic looking letters written on his face. And so when I was looking at that encyclopedia and, everybody said that the terrorists were speaking Arabic, and I saw those letters and made that connection in my mind, I just was so fascinated by that. I mean, I was 10 years old. So, of course, that was the only thing in my mind, was like, wow, this is going to be like the mummy. And, and I remember going to Half Price Books. And again, my only connection at that point to Arabic was Egypt. So I got like one of those travel books, if you're going to go to Egypt, how to say basic words, and learning how to write the Arabic script. And in high school, I had taken Latin all the way up to the college level. And I guess if you learn Latin, a huge part of that language in particular is you can't help but learn how languages are put together in the first place. And so that was when I really understood the word linguist and that I wanted to be one. And luckily, my older stepbrother was a Russian linguist in the United States Air Force. And so, as everybody else was picking out their universities that they were going to go to, I already knew that there was one school in the whole world that could make you fluent in any language in a year. And that was the school that I was going to go to.
Okay, very cool. You were very goal oriented. It sounds like right from the start.
Yeah, definitely.
So, you're talking about Defense Language Institute in California? I take it.
Yes.
So,
The
what was it like
Hogwarts of
studying there?
language.
The Hogwarts. I've not heard that before. That's good.
Definitely it's its own little world. I think anybody that's ever been there understands that there is no other military or civilian school that can compare to it. They had said that your assignment in Monterey, California is going to be the most beautiful place that you will ever be so unhappy, because the homework requirements, balancing military training with a civilian schoolhouse environment, and that our teachers were native speakers of the countries which they had come from, but they were also not credentialed educators, right? They didn't have teachers' licenses. Just by virtue of being able to get a government clearance to come on base and then knowing the language was their only credential.
Wow.
And they, in Farsi at least, they called us bachaha, which means children. And they treated us like children. And so, like I said, it's the weirdest place. And coming of age, so to speak, in that place and being away from home for the first time was an experience like nothing else. I don't even know how to put it into words. I guess that's why I tried to write this book.
Yeah, I've heard some interesting stories there, because I guess like you mentioned, there's a tremendous, I guess, mishmash of cultures and peoples there, and the students are from, I guess, every branch of the military, right? It's like a joint kind of school, so it sounds very, very interesting, but not easy at all, and quite stressful as well. So did you have any hiccups while you're going through? Did you graduate on time and fully fluent as you needed to be?
I did make it through. I had some personal issues come up with my eating disorder. Obviously, being 19 years old, was in the most toxic relationship you could imagine. Did some underage drinking, but never got in trouble for it. And looking back, I'm like, you jeopardized your dream career for one party. Spent a lot of time by myself walking city streets and talking to strangers, which really shaped who I am today and how I like to travel and interact with the world. But I definitely made it out on time, but that was one of the very first times I didn't get perfect test scores coming out of an academic program, which I don't know. I mean, of course I made it out. I got my associate's degree in Persian Farsi, was one of the top students in the class, but I never felt like that was good enough.
Okay, I see. And I understand that you learned Pashto later on as well. Was that self-taught, or did you have to go to some sort of accelerated class for that or something?
So after the Defense Language Institute, we did 3 months in San Angelo, Texas for the intelligence portion, or the what you do with the language portion.
Mhm.
And that was obviously, I was already dissatisfied with being assigned Farsi. I was fascinated by Persian culture, but not politically or militarily interested in Iran in the
Mhm.
least bit. And so getting that, the intelligence portion of that made me even more miserable. So when I showed up on my first duty station in Fort Meade, Maryland, I just remember waiting to be put on an assignment for Farsi. And I didn't have a top secret clearance yet. So basically, you just have to go sit in a common room in your squadron, because our squadron was a skiff, and you had to get an escort to walk the halls and go use the restroom because you didn't have a top secret
Oh
clearance.
my gosh.
And somebody walked in with a clipboard, and they were kind of walking around talking to people. And I overheard them say that they had an experimental on site Pashto course, and that they were going to take the 63 weeks of Pashto from Defense Language Institute and condense it into 20 weeks. And they didn't know if it could be done. And I said, I will do whatever it takes to get into that course. And I did. We messed up the course for everybody. We were the only course that ever did it, but I got perfect scores on that test.
Oh, okay, fantastic.
So, and then I
So,
was immediately assigned to an Afghan mission.
okay. So this is like close to 2 years, I'm guessing, since you initially enlisted, and you're finally in a position to do the job that you wanted to do after all.
Yes.
Okay, and so was that at NSA headquarters at Meade then, or you were just like working shifts and with your headphones on all day long?
All night long, but yes.
Okay, I see. And assume you cannot talk super specific about that kind of thing, but is there anything you can tell us about it? Was it live feeds, or was it earlier recordings, something like that?
I'm not really sure where the line is. I know that what we were able to say in the book was just enough. Again, not really sure how close I can get. I do
Okay.
believe I'm allowed to say it was live, but we were some of the first linguists to ever work with the drone program.
Mm.
The way I describe it was sitting in a dark room arguing about Pokemon. It was 99.9% nothing, and then that 0.1% of, oh my God, I am not qualified to do this.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Wow. Yeah, I have to imagine most of the time worldwide, I guess, like nothing's going on, and then suddenly something very important is going on. I can see how that would lead to like a frantic burst of activity. Did you find it ultimately, after all this time training and waiting, did you find it to be as fulfilling as you had hoped?
I did not. Obviously, like you said, I'm very goal oriented, and the way that intelligence worked is that everything is very heavily compartmentalized. I was the lowest rank that you could be doing that job in the Air Force. And once I had gotten where I wanted to be, listening to the people I wanted to be listening to, I could not care less about my military decorum. I just wanted to do the mission and learn as much as I could, which inherently left me dissatisfied because I was not a decision maker.
Mm.
And I wanted to go into this with a global view because, 10 years prior to that, my father and I were going to solve it all we were going to fix everything. And all of a sudden it's like, you're part of it, but you're not. You're very insignificant. I felt very insignificant.
Oh yeah. I can understand that. So how did you feel then? You mentioned drone program. I mean, how did you feel that ultimately? Oh, I'm going to assume here. I don't think you spell it out specifically in the book. I'm going to assume that you would listen to people, and then they would cease to exist after a while. What did it feel like, knowing that you were involved in that type of kinetic operation?
I would say that the way that we were segmented off and the way we did our particular jobs is that we only supported soldiers that were on the ground. So everything we did was to make sure that we were the eyes and the ears of soldiers actually on the ground, and that in the moments that things got spicy, that justified everything at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's one of the reasons why I was so inherently dissatisfied, is because I wanted to be part of the strategy and the ethics and the big questions. I didn't want to be the Band-Aid on the bullet wound. I didn't want to go from one emergency to the next. But I am proud of the fact that regardless of what you think about the war and what we know about it in hindsight, there were men on the ground, and we did our best to keep those men safe.
Okay. Yeah, I can definitely understand that. So was Fort Meade, NSA, was that your only duty station for the duration of your whole enlistment?
Technically it was, but we were given the chance, like one of the ways that they prevented burnout on this mission is to send us down to Fort Gordon in Georgia. Technically it was a TDY, but I think one of the ways they justified it is, I don't know if you've ever been to the Fort Meade area, but it's very affluent and it's very nice. Going down to Fort Gordon in Augusta, Georgia, they said that, your standard of living decreases so much that they were able to make it a deployment. So you got deployment pay.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
So it was considered a full deployment, but basically it was, instead of burning out in Maryland, you go to Georgia and burn out doing the same job. It was, I don't know,
yeah.
Somehow it worked, right? I had the time of my life in Georgia, really met some great people, and did a slightly different version of the same exact job.
Okay, interesting. So it sounds like that time, like you said, it was very good, but I know that you left the Air Force after that initial enlistment. So what was it that drove you to move on?
One of the decisions was the way that particular mission caused so much burnout, and that the only way to get away from that was sort of to phase out of it or to rank out of it, because you would think the better you get at it, the more you would have to do with it. But once somebody got really proficient at our particular mission set, or they had achieved a higher rank, they would get pulled from that mission, and then they would just be doing like bureaucratic or supervisory things at the unit. So one of my realizations was, my very last supervisor in the Air Force at Fort Meade was actually my stepbrother's very first supervisor in the Air Force at Fort Meade. And that this particular master sergeant, he was wonderful, but he had been basically leaving on TDY and coming back to Fort Meade because he was a linguist for 17 years.
Oh my gosh.
And his attitude at that point was, I've got 3 more years and I'm going to have the best retirement. And I was 24 and could not imagine that being my future. When I was recruited, they said, learn a language, you'll travel the world. And we learned the language, and the Air Force said, you are way too expensive to travel the world. You can go from Maryland to Georgia, from Maryland to Georgia. And because of that particular job assignment. And so I had explored perhaps staying in the Air Force, but re-enlisting to a job that would open the world up to me. So I remember at the re-enlistment conversation, I had asked if I could transfer to being a firefighter. And that was when the Air Force kind of said, we don't just let anybody re-enlist. This isn't the Army. Re-enlistment is a privilege. And then they said, but if you sign on as a linguist, we'll give you a bonus. And I said, I'm not here for the money, but thank you. I had explored the idea of then going into the Army just to get out of there. But I could not at that point with not my attitude, but I just couldn't see going through boot camp again. I just was like, I'm not gonna get screamed at just so that I could, make a sideways career move. I had spent a lot of time looking at humanitarian aid organizations and hoping that my military service and my language ability would be worth something, and it was not. So leaving the Air Force was bittersweet. It was my home, but there was nothing left for me there. My vision of the world was so much bigger than what a career in that uniform could offer me.
Okay. Yeah, that makes perfect sense what you're saying. And yeah, that is incredibly limiting, just 2 different places on the East Coast of the US. And so, yeah, I can definitely understand why that would not feel like what you wanted to keep doing when you've got your whole life still ahead of you. But it sounds like you also like that job. You like the environment, at least, and the work in Georgia at Fort Gordon, like you mentioned. So ultimately you came back to, was it the exact same facility in Georgia, or was it at least somewhere there on Fort Gordon as a civilian?
It was on there. It was on the same base as Fort Gordon. I was so mixed up at the time, and I was talking to so many contractor recruiters that on a whim, I got that house in Augusta. And I remember a day in late December between Christmas and New Year's, I was on a run and I got a call from a recruiter, and she said, we got you in. You'll be a Farsi linguist. And I said, okay, thank you. And then I paused for a second and I asked her, which assignment was that? What city? And she said that this is the Fort Gordon assignment. And I said, okay, cool. I don't have to move back to Maryland. I was kind of willing to take any job at that point, but luckily it worked out. I picked the right house and the right assignment.
Okay, good. And were you back at a new position at Fort Gordon just a few weeks after you left the Air Force then?
I was, and it was to the point to where maybe it's kind of a telling sign about how our intelligence agencies work. But I still had access to my Air Force missions 3 full months later, signing on as a new job as a contractor. And so I was like immediately talking online to all of my old colleagues in the Air Force. And they were like, how are you doing? What are you doing? Where are you doing it? And so just getting to see those people, as well as people that I had gone to language school with. Obviously, as we graduated DLI, you got your assignment. And so half of us went to Maryland and the other half went to Georgia. And we couldn't necessarily like switch our base assignments. So coming back to Georgia as a civilian was a way to see several of my closest friends again.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, there's a level of stability there, even with these big changes going on. So, did that job kind of meet your expectations as well? I mean, was it exactly what you were told it would be, or did that also turn out to be, a bit of a maybe a letdown?
So the position I had as a contractor after the Air Force only meant to serve as a continuation of my top secret clearance, because Air Force or not, it was set to expire that particular year. So I needed to get my foot back into the building to have it renewed, because a lot of those contractors will not hire you unless it's already active, because it is such an expensive process.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And so the nature of these contracts is they pay you as you go. If you submit, your 2 weeks notice, it's not necessarily like they paid you up front for the year. So you don't really owe them anything back. And so I used that position and the fact that I literally had no assignments. Nobody really knew what I was supposed to do. I just showed up as a contractor. I used that time to work with other recruiters, and I was doing the language testing outside of the job itself and talking to a recruiter that had promised me that by October 2017, he could have me in Bagram as a Pashto linguist in Afghanistan. And so I was very interested in, staying in Fort Gordon and staying available for that position to open up for me, even as I was assigned to another contract as a Farsi linguist.
Okay, I see. Yeah, that sounds like an absolute dream for you. Then, just having to bide your time for that amazing position in Bagram. In that case, after all the work that you had put in to prepare for it, essentially. So, do I understand correctly? You were kind of sitting there all day, and you didn't have much to really occupy your time. Then, is that right? Like they weren't putting new recordings or anything like that in front of you at the time.
Exactly. I actually had access to regular internet and I watched an entire semester of Neurology 101 taught by Dr. Sapolsky at Stanford.
Mm.
That's what I used my
Wow,
time to
wow,
do.
wow. Yeah, I mean, you're staying occupied with something, but even if it's not, exactly what you were expecting to do when you were hired. So I know that you were not there very long before this big event that kind of changed everything for you. So can you talk about like what led up to that anyway? Were you just keeping an eye on the news in general while you were adjusting to this new position?
I was definitely paying attention to the news, and I think that hopefully with this book, I can kind of remind people that we went through the same shock and disbelief in 2017 with the Trump 1.0 presidency, and that everything that happened that year following his inauguration was simply unprecedented and shocking. And to remind people, like, we did go through this already, and that for those of us in the government who were kind of watching, unfortunately, it was Fox News. I had actually asked NSA several times to stop, having that channel on their TVs because it's incredibly racist. But we were watching the news kind of from within the tower, and it was so surreal because the government was lying at a rate that we just could not process. And I know people will say, like, oh, well, the government's lied before. As somebody who served under Barack Obama, it wasn't the same. It was not this sort of double think, blatant lying every single day. And some of the military decisions made under Trump, it was I think a later high-ranking administration official had said, usually when military options are presented to the president, it's listed as like A, B, C, and D. A being the safest and most preferred, and D kind of being like the last resort option. And they would give him those options, and he would be like, I want option E. I want to do this crazy thing that somebody whispered in my ear, and you're going to make it happen. And that's exactly what we were watching as people who had access to the truth of what was exactly happening on the ground in these other countries, and then seeing what he would order our military and intelligence institutions to do. It was almost like, well, why the fuck are we still here then? What does anything that we do still matter if this person is going to do absolutely insane, senseless acts of violence that make our job impossible? And so, as somebody who was, again, not even 25 yet, not even with a developed prefrontal cortex, somebody who was trying to stabilize their life from an eating disorder, somebody who had just lost their father, I kind of lost all connection to like what mattered in life. And it kind of left me vulnerable to doing something so drastic.
Okay. I see. So the day that you printed this document, was there any forethought to this? Had you planned on that, or this specific report caught your eye days or weeks earlier, anything like that? Can you kind of walk me through the actions of that day or two period of your life there?
Yes, so it had started the week before. I know that we've been authorized in the past to acknowledge the fact that there is a secret or an intelligence based daily news website that only we have access to. And it works kind of like Yahoo News or CNN News, where there is a sidebar that says like the most articles, or the trending. And this report wound up being like the trending article.
Hmm.
And that, again, just to bring people back to 2017, there was an intelligence leak every single Friday at that point in his presidency. And so we had seen that halfway through a week, and we were kind of just saying to each other, yeah, that's going to be the Friday night leak. Like, this is going to be front page news by Monday morning. The weekend came and went, and it wasn't. And that was when I just felt like, oh, I guess this isn't going to change the world. And I was very heavily influenced by the Intercept at the time, and their motto was, if you see something, leak something. And I printed it out because I kind of just I didn't know anything about Edward Snowden or Chelsea Manning, but I know that they had gotten caught because they had used computers.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was so ignorant at the time, but I had printed it out and I sat on it for a couple of days. And usually I have a crystal clear memory, but whatever it was, that particular Tuesday that I walked out of NSA with that document, some kind of trauma. Obviously I wrote a book about it. Like, I want to know what happened that particular day, and I cannot tell you. I don't know.
Hmm. A lot has been written about that report, and of course about you as well. One thing that I found interesting in the book was you mentioned when you were talking about the report itself, which basically any of the listeners, they can go find out a lot more about it right now. But I think that you mentioned that your plea deal, which came much later, it kind of prevents you from talking a lot about the report now. So are you prevented from talking about the details of it, even if it is out there in the public eye at this point?
Yes, public or not, nobody that has a current security clearance or an expired one, such as myself, is actually prohibited by law to talk about the contents of that report or any other report that is classified that has been leaked and is now in the public space.
Yeah, it still has not been declassified, regardless of whether it's widely available or not, I guess. So you only very briefly touched on the report itself in the book there, and I recall actually going back even further, 2013. I remember when the Edward Snowden leaks were happening, and it was just a complete screenshot of some sort of data tool I'd never seen before from NSA, and right across the top it still said the top secret, like in the orange, the banner across the top. I was like, wait a minute, why am I seeing this on a news site? They didn't even crop it or anything. So very surprising to see that stuff. But once you actually took it out, I understand it's not that difficult to remove a paper document from the facility. What happened to it once it was on its way to the Intercept?
I do not know, but I have learned so much in hindsight about the day it was received by the Intercept, and that there were senior journalists on site that knew once a document like that is received, while it is their priority to authenticate it, it does need to be in a secured location. And that was one of the reasons why I had chosen the Intercept, is that almost everybody that works there is a former military or intelligence specialist, and that they would understand what they were receiving and not necessarily sensationalize it, but also protect it. And they were supposed to do that. And then one of their employees named Matthew Cole got his hands on it and sent direct scans of it to one of his friends, somebody he's on a first name basis at the NSA, not even somebody that the Intercept would have contacted to verify the document. He sent it to one of his buddies. And that person was immediately able to see the printer that was used to print it out, because the paper does have a digital signature on it. And they wanted to know how he had received it. And so he sent them also the envelope with the Georgia postal code on it, and basically did everything he could to help NSA and the FBI determine my identity.
Golly, that really is incredible to me, because the Intercept, they had and they wanted to keep that kind of reputation of protecting leakers, and then they just destroyed that reputation in the space. Well, in two photographs and in two messages, essentially, it kind of sounds like. And I know that Cole and I believe it was another guy, Esposito, they just come off looking so poorly out of all this, from what I've seen. It really is astonishing, honestly. So this person that Matthew Cole sent it to, did he contact the FBI, or was he with the FBI? I mean, how did it go from there to law enforcement?
Those are communications that I was not privy to. I only know that we were able to see like what Matthew Cole and his buddy had said to each other, because that was part of the discovery.
Okay, I've got it. Well, what should they have done, or what had they done in the past? Like, they just, I don't know, just like speak about it verbally and try to get a comment over the phone from FBI spokesperson or something like that? Like, how do they verify that this is not some sort of hoax on your part while also protecting your identity?
I wouldn't know, because I didn't go to school for journalism.
Yeah. Okay, right.
I'm not a professional. I'm just a leaker. I'm just a criminal.
I've got it. Okay, well, it's whatever was supposed to happen, it certainly didn't happen in your case.
Yeah.
Gosh. So how long was it after that you were actually confronted with all of this?
Honestly, I think they waited like 2.5 weeks. I believe, if I remember from the court documents, they were saying on or around May 9th, the document was mailed, and that it was received by the Intercept, I believe, by May 14th. And then somewhere in the subsequent week, NSA and the FBI were then spoken to. And then over Memorial Day weekend, I went on my trip to Belize for my father. I had come back on Monday, and then I worked Tuesday through Friday at the NSA. And then on Saturday, as I was coming home from the grocery store, was when the FBI pulled up behind me, and everything began from that Saturday, June 2nd.
Okay, that's actually longer than I had thought it was for some reason, but it does seem like they showed up pretty well prepared from everything I've seen. And I also have to say, if we can kind of skip forward for a moment to the documentary, it's just astonishing the level of stuff that was ultimately released. Like the audio transcripts are just absolutely incredible from that interview that you sat through. Are you able to listen to those now? I mean, have you heard them all the way through, for example?
No, I do not read, watch, or listen to anything about me.
Mm, okay. Yeah, I can understand that. I mean, you experienced it firsthand, so probably don't need to. But yeah, it's really really taught in a way that, and suspenseful in a way that fiction simply cannot be. And you know, you can hear the tension in every interaction, honestly, and it's really astonishing stuff. And it's unfortunate that it came at such a cost to you as well as it clearly did. But what do you
I
remember about that interview with the FBI?
I will say that some of the audio and the transcripts were later used in September at my second detention hearing. And that was when documentarians, as well as the people who produced Is This a Room, the play, and then the
Hmm.
subsequent movie, that was when they realized there was the full audio and transcript available for a FOIA request, but that it had first come to light in that hearing as a way for the prosecution to humiliate me.
Hmm.
They wanted to use it as an example of when a woman is calm or actually able to have a conversation with law enforcement, it's either incredibly dangerous, it is cold, calculating, and then at a later date, they were able to make it seem as if I was ignorant and naive. And they were able to use my own words against me in a way that they had their cake and they could eat it too. And I wasn't saved that day in the courtroom, but I was saved at a later date when other women heard those words and said, that is a terrified woman. That is a
Hmm.
woman who is thinking on her feet because she is scared for her life. And we are not going to let this be misconstrued by the government. And we are going to publish it for the world.
Hmm. Okay, yeah, that's fascinating. They get that perspective that so many others would have missed. I'm certain. Was this? I think is her name Tina Satter? Is that correct? She was the um, director of the one of the films, wasn't she?
Yes, Tina Satter, somebody had gotten that transcript in front of her and she said, this isn't a transcript. This is a script.
Hmm. Yeah, well, I certainly feel she was correct about that. I mean, it was both, but it really is incredible what she was able to do with that to share your story with so many people in such a realistic way as well. It's really an accomplishment, in my opinion. I really love the film, and I wish I'd seen the play live when it was open. But it's also, you know, a rendition of the some of the worst moments of your life too. So how does it feel to know that that has been like recreated and replayed for so many people since then?
I'm not going to say that they took 5 years of my life from me because I lived every day and that time was never stolen from me. But I will say that there were subsequent times following that interview that I was able to see Agent Garrick and Agent Taylor. And I do believe Agent Garrick committed perjury in that courtroom when he was on the stand talking about how he felt during that interview and how he had no idea that I would prove to be such a dangerous person, when you can clearly tell by the interview that he had all the power in his hands and that there was no threat from me during or after that hearing. And I had just had a conversation kind of about this the other day where thoughts come back to me. And I just remembered that during that interview, even though I knew nothing about the legalities or anything specific about what Chelsea Manning had gone through, I did know that before she was ever even charged with anything, they had disappeared her to a cell in Quantico for months in solitary confinement, and that her family didn't even know where she was at that time. So when Agent Garrick told me that I was going to be okay, that they were going to drive me themselves in one of those unmarked government vehicles, and that it would be okay because he was going to handcuff my hands in front of me so I would be comfortable, and that he would be in the car with me so I would feel safe, and that the only thing he wanted to apologize for would that it would be a bit of a drive, is what he said. And that was when, I think that was when something in my heart exploded, because I thought I was going to go to Quantico that night. I thought that was it. I am about to disappear for a very long time. And it's a lot of privilege that I have to deconstruct, but also just with the knowledge that my only comparison was disappearing to Quantico for 9 months in solitary confinement, that there was one female FBI agent, period, out of 11 that were sent to arrest me. One of them was a female. And she said that, or I don't even think there was a female. I think that they had to call a female police officer to, that's what it was. I'm so sorry. The FBI did not send a single woman to arrest me, but they had a warrant for my physical person. So after Garrick had told me that, they were taking me somewhere, they had to call a female police officer to pat me down because they couldn't touch me because they were men. And that female police officer told them that they were not taking me anywhere. I just remember I couldn't hear what they were saying, but she had pulled them aside and they were having a very heated conversation. And that was when Garrick came back and he said, actually, they're going to bring another police officer to take you to jail. And when that second police car came up and another woman showed up, and there were now two women in uniforms in marked cars, and they used the word jail, that was the first time in 4 hours that I knew I was not just going to survive the encounter, but that I was going to be accounted for and that my family would someday be able to find me.
Well, yeah, I had not even considered that at all, honestly. But yeah, I can see how terrifying that would be, thinking that nobody's even going to know where you are or how to contact you or anything like that. So that must have been a very odd sort of relief then when it happened. Can you talk about how you were like processed in and that sort of thing? Like, I'm assuming that was the first time you've ever been in handcuffs in your life or taken to a jail or anything like that at all?
Yeah, so the actual physical moment of arrest was a shock for me. And I'm going to cry in a second, but I was a power lifter and I had done bench press that morning. And I couldn't believe how much it hurt me physically to have my arms handcuffed behind my back. And so just years later, when I see big guys with their handcuffs behind their back, it just, something in me breaks, because I'm a kind of I'm not really like a big woman or anything like that. And I remember how much it hurt me as an athlete to have my hands behind my back like that. I'm also claustrophobic. So being in that police vehicle, I don't think I was processing the bigger picture of my life being upside down. It was, I'm in physical pain in a confined space. And that was what was on my mind. And I just kind of knew at that point that I could not panic, that I could not be that person who was out of sorts and irrational, because they would misconstrue it as me being upset about being arrested, other than just extreme physical discomfort and panic of the immediate surroundings. And I did everything I could to keep that under wraps. I do remember once I was finally booked in, I wish I could remember her name. She was actually a very, very sweet corrections officer. She asked me if I wanted something to eat, because it was like 9 o'clock at night at that point. And, she asked if a bologna sandwich would be okay. And I told her I didn't eat meat. So she said, okay, I'll bring you a peanut butter sandwich. And at that moment, I was still in such denial that I would never leave that jail, that she brought me 2 sandwiches on white bread. And I was so hungry that I licked the peanut butter off, but I refused to eat the white bread because, as an athlete who was cutting weight for a powerlifting event, I could not put white bread in my body.
Oh, gosh.
And then after that, somebody named David was walking me to my cell, and he looked over his shoulder, and I don't know if it was like a courtroom tactic or if he was genuinely curious, because they weren't provided the information at the time. But he looked over his shoulder, and as we're walking, said, by the way, what did you do? And I had told him, I was serving my country.
Probably the first time anyone had told him that, I bet.
Yeah, I had no idea why I said that. I didn't know if I was trying to get him to empathize with me or if I was just being a smartass.
Wow. Yeah, it sounds like such a horribly difficult transition, and that you had that hope, I guess, that this powerlifting event was just a few days or weeks away, that you would be out for that, and then it turned out not at all to be the case. When did you have this realization, like along the process, that you might be inside for years? Was it like days later or weeks later?
Well, I remember that the very next Monday morning, meeting my public defender for the first time, and he introduced himself, and I said, that's great. How much do I gotta pay to get out of here? Because I'm not really like a true crime person. I don't like those shows, but all I knew was that people would post bail and then get out before their trial. And so that day, when it was like, oh, we're not even going to talk about that till Thursday, that was the first time I thought my life had ended. And then Thursday came, and that was the second time my life had ended because they had denied bail. And the third time was months later at the end of September, when they had denied bail again for little to no reason. That was when I realized, like, I'm not getting out of here. And I think that my living conditions would improve dramatically if I just moved on and went to prison.
Well, I know that your mom and I think your stepdad also, they came down really, really quickly. But were you able to actually see them, like at visitation or anything like that, or just talk to them on the phone a little bit those initial few months?
Yes, so I was able to talk to them on the phone. Luckily, money was not an issue, so I was able to call as often as I needed. And then once the story had gotten out and people started putting money on my books, I was never subjected to the blatant discrimination against poverty that other people go through when they're locked up and are unable to pay $3 per 15-minute phone call to stay in touch with their family. And they were at visitation every time they were in Augusta, Georgia. Like, if they were in Georgia, it was to see me. So I had visitation almost every Saturday and Sunday that I was there.
Oh, okay. Okay. That's more than I anticipated, honestly. Did the Intercept, did the staff, did they provide any kind of support at all after what had happened? Like, did they take any responsibility for their, you know, actions that led to your fast arrest?
They never took responsibility or said there was a mistake made. I do believe later on somebody did admit, and they were subsequently removed. They The media company that owns The Intercept was part of a freedom of speech foundation that did step up and hire a new legal team for me. I met some amazing people. I love the people who were on that team. Joe Whitley, Matt Chester saved my life. Personally, he did. But I do understand that at the end of the day, they were paid by that media corporation to keep the word intercept out of the courtroom as much as possible.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, I hadn't considered that at all. Of course, they're going to want to do some damage control, certainly, but I think even in the indictment, it doesn't say Intercept at all. It just says like Media Organization One or something like that, doesn't it? Or named media organization. I can't recall exactly, but very general anyway. Meanwhile, I know all of this is kind of playing out in the public sphere. Were you completely aware of that? Did you know that you were in headlines all over the place in those first few weeks?
Yes, and that is why to this day I am unable to watch or listen or read anything about me, because I have a very violent physical reaction. I start shaking and my teeth start chattering, because in those first couple of weeks when I was in the courtroom, I don't blame the women I was incarcerated with. Their particular routine, and after a few months of living that routine, I understand why it was so important for their stability and their mental health. They watched the Augusta nightly news at 5:30 p.m. every single day of the week. That was a requirement for the room that we were in. And so when I would happen to be the main story on that news for the night, after a very traumatic day at court, would come home and they would be watching what the government had to say about
Hmm.
me. It was very traumatic. It did start a lot of conflicts, and it became very obviously I could not ask them not to watch it. But I would come home from court and I would be in the shower and it would come on, and I could just hear them all listening to the TV talk about me.
Hmm. What did they think of that? Because that seems like just a very different type of incident than what so many of them might be familiar with.
So this was the first time in my entire life dealing with other adults who may not have even finished high school or had an elementary reading level. And that was the first time I really understood that America has a media literacy problem, and that they couldn't actually understand what had happened. And so when they heard the prosecution or newscasters repeat what the prosecution had said, they honestly thought I was a terrorist.
Oh my gosh.
Even when I was in prison, people would read articles about me and then they would say, "What was it like being in the Russian military?" They literally thought I had served in the Russian military after reading an article about my offense.
Wow, wow.
So there would be a lot of conflict, and I really had to kind of toughen up and start to stand up for myself after I would be featured in the news.
My gosh. How do I put this? I understand exactly what you're saying about media literacy, but I would also expect that, women who were in jail with you, that they would be the last ones to just take at face value anything coming from a DOJ spokesperson. for example. I would think that they would understand that the reality would be, very different than what is playing out on the news, even if they had not been featured on the news themselves. So, but they were kind of uncritically taking in all of that and assuming it was all exactly as portrayed. That's very surprising to me.
It was a very long time until, so the problem is I was featured prominently in the local news within the first 3 months of being there. And as I started to understand, once I had been one of the people who had been there the longest, was that when new women come in, they kind of have like a 30-day kind of vetting period, I guess. And that in the first 24 hours, you're going to hear 6 different stories on why they were there. And so they couldn't just take at face value when I said, I saw a document, I don't like Trump, I released that document, because they were there for violent crimes and hard drugs and methamphetamines and stuff like that. And so when you say, oh, well, I'm here because of a piece of paper, they're just like, whoa, 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 nobody gets arrested over a piece of paper. What do you mean? And then, so then when they would see the news media and actually hear like from somebody on the TV, this is what she did, and then not understand it fully, they were very confused. And I just remember a woman looked at me, and it was kind of like I don't know how to say it. It felt like a scene in a movie almost, the way her eyes were bugging out of her head, and she kept shaking her head side to side. And she was like, well, we've never seen anything like this before. And, at the time I was like, what an ignorant person. And now I'm like, no, they really haven't. Even the officers didn't know how to deal with me. Nobody knew how to do that, because this was a small town county jail. That county had 600 people in it. My lead attorney, Joe Whitley, said, you're in the middle of Redneckistan right now. Nobody knew what to do with me.
My gosh. So, as you mentioned, these pretrial hearings went on for months. At what point did you decide to plead guilty? I mean, that was not always the plan, was it?
No, the plan was to go to trial, because I had believed that even with a confession on the books, an illegal confession, they had no right to use that in court. Even with the confession on the books, that a jury of my peers would understand. And as the months went on, and as I saw this media battle take place, and that the narrative was not what I had done and what that document said, the narrative was, who is this woman? When I had understood that that was what I was up against, and that my image was forever damaged by those first couple months in jail, and that I would never be allowed to speak for myself in my own voice. And the conditions of that county jail took a toll on my mental health. My decision became going to prison to save my life, or committing suicide in that jail. It was never about right or wrong, justice or injustice anymore. It was, what am I going to do in order to see the other side? And that because the court refused to rule on whether or not my confession in that house would count or not, because I had not been Mirandized and I was not officially in custody, and I was never even offered an attorney, that they were going to use that in the trial. And I was quickly understanding the nature of the Espionage Act, the law that I had broken. There was no public defense or intention clause. There was no way for me to argue that I had not understood fully the felony I had committed, and that I had not even truly committed espionage. that the statute on the paper, 793E, willful retention and disclosure of national defense information, and that the way this law had been used is that national defense information is not a legally defined term, and that could be anything the government determines to be national defense information, that according to that one sentence, I had done the thing. I was guilty.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was just a matter of, how would I be guilty? Would I plead guilty, or would I wait to be convicted by a jury?
Okay. Yeah, I can totally understand that. I was very surprised when you got such a harsh sentence, such a long sentence, compared to many other leakers. You had the longest sentence of any similar, or a person in similar circumstances, didn't you? 63 months, I think it was.
Yep.
How did they justify that, or did they need to justify that when compared to other leakers in the past?
They knew that they had the Southern District of Georgia in their pocket. They knew that those judges would not come off of the sentencing guidelines. The original sentencing guidelines, should I have been found guilty, was a minimum of 6.5, 7.5 years, no matter what. And they knew that they could have gotten that without even trying. However, we had subpoenaed about 41 documents because we wanted to prove at least that my release of the information did not jeopardize national security, and that because the government also had to spend time and money dealing with the subpoenas and the hearing, that even if I had accepted a plea deal, they were going to make it as unpalatable and harsh as possible because of those subpoenas. And there was even a moment, my attorney had called me on a Sunday afternoon, and he kind of said, like, this is your time. They are offering 5 years. And I said, I want 48 months. I want 4 years. And he said that Jenna, oh, it was always fucking Jenna, that every day that Jenna had to wait, she was going to add a month.
Oh my God.
So I made it 3 days. And when the offer became 63 months, I had called Matt back, and I was like, she's not playing, Matt. Plead guilty, Matt.
Oh gosh. Wow. Yeah, she knows how to ratchet up the pressure.
Yeah, it was, like I said, I knew I was guilty from the get-go. Part of my plea deal is I can never say that I pled guilty under duress. So I do not. I knew I was guilty from the day the FBI showed up to my house, and I've never justified it. But the self-preservation in changing my plea to guilty, I was under an immense amount of personal pressure.
Yeah, I can certainly see how you would be. You mentioned earlier that you were hoping to get out of the jail and into the prison because you thought that there would be better conditions there. Is that how it turned out in the end? Was prison easier for you than jail had been? Right? Not, I shouldn't say easier, better anyway.
Oh my gosh, yes. My first day at Carswell was like, it was similar to getting out of basic training and showing up at DLI. Everything, I know it's stupid because it was literally like a prison compound, and it was the housing building and the main administrative building and then the recreation center. But when we had walked in, I mean, I was in a 20 by 20 one-room prison cell for 15 months. Going out on that prison compound was like, I'm never going to learn where everything is. It's so big here. I can't even find my room from the bathroom.
Wow.
And I saw the track outside, and I saw the trees, and I couldn't wait. I was like, I have money on my books. Like, why can't I go to commissary and buy running shoes today? Like, I don't understand. my world changed, and my first few months there were very happy.
Yeah, that's surprising. I guess I had never considered the comparisons between jail and prison before, but I can see what a huge difference that would make. I do understand though that things got became much different for everyone, once the COVID-19 pandemic started. So how did that change from your perspective inside?
It was a very short but abrupt transition from the way the prison had been run before to the way that there was such an authoritarian crackdown, and that for a while we were kept in our cells. Carswell is a little unique from other federal prisons in that the cells don't have doors. And that
Hmm.
means we do not have restrooms in our cells like other federal prisons. So it was 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, having to get authorization to go use the restroom. We're not
Oh my
even
gosh.
talking about your shower schedule, getting out of the cell to go use the phone once a day. Phone calls went from anytime you had money, 15 minutes at a time, to 5 minutes a day. Like the phones themselves would cut off at 5 minutes.
Hmm.
And you could only go down when it was your turn. And 5 minutes on the computer per day to send emails. It's basically like a daily proof of life.
Oh my gosh.
And then George Floyd was murdered. And those cops came in the next day like we were the ones rioting on the streets.
Really?
And that
Wow.
June, we were put on lockdown for it. And the riot control specialists of federal prisons were sent to cities like Washington, D.C., and they were the ones seen on TV beating up protesters. And that was actually why the Bureau of Prisons, every federal prison in the country was put on lockdown, is because we were at critical staffing and there was no longer riot control within the federal prisons because they sent so many officers to beat up civilians on the streets. And when I found that out 5 days into the lockdown by listening to NPR, I just thought, oh boy, like these officers are beating civilians up with impunity. When they come back to this prison, it's going to be a new level of danger. And they were pepper spraying people at close range. They had the ballistic canisters and like the RPG style that they were pointing at women who were just begging to use the restroom. And something in me snapped. And I just remember screaming outside my cell, and any officer that dared to walk by our cell, I would just harangue them and be like, were you one of the ones in DC? Huh? Did you like beating up civilians? Huh? How do you feel about it? How would you feel if George Floyd was your brother? I was just screaming at them because they were part of it. And my silent protest, I would sit there and make Black Lives Matter collages out of Time magazines that were showing up, and just, I would not shut up. And that was when somebody next to me was like, dude, Winner, you need to chill. Like, let us know if you want something to chill. And that was when I started using synthetic THC and some other pills. Basically, I didn't know what those pills were. I would take any pill that people would hand to me.
Oh my gosh.
And the way that THC was brought in on strips of paper and stuff like that, I think this is so dumb, but somebody had given me one and it was methamphetamine. And I told that woman, hey, I'm not paying you for that shit. And if you ever try to give me something again, I'm going to hit you in the mouth, because that was the worst 5 minutes of my life that high had lasted. But that just goes to show that I had gone from being a very straight edge person to taking anything that was put in my hands.
My gosh, yeah, I cannot imagine the stress of all of that, and I can see how you would turn to anything to kind of get away from all of it, and how that has its advantages and disadvantages as well. Was this by this point? Were you coming close to your release date? I mean, were you able to like count the days by then?
No.
Oh my gosh.
Part of the trauma for me was that I refused to look at my legal paperwork. I did not know when I was getting out, but that the country had taken such a turn in 2020 that I stopped believing and trusting in the government's ability to release inmates on time for any reason. And so that was one of the reasons why I had begun acting out so much and really fully assimilated as an inmate and started having relationships, because the real world at that point ceased to exist for me. And the only thing that mattered was what I wanted in that prison right then and there.
Hmm. Gosh. Was there anything that ultimately brought you out of that? Or is that how it felt right up until the very end of your time inside?
My sister had a baby, and I had been so reckless and so irresponsible that a week before she gave birth, I was caught in my girlfriend's room, and the disciplinary refraction I received for that was I had lost my video visits for 14 days. And those were the 14 days in which she had her baby.
Oh man.
So I missed the birth of my niece because I stopped believing in the outside world.
Hmm.
Yeah, I fucked up. That was worse than the felony.
Gosh. So did you just make a decision then to like turn things around at that point, and set some new goals or something like that, or I mean, yeah, it's hard to I mean, you can't unmiss something like the birth of a child.
I had already missed so much, and things were still not better. I was being personally harassed because throughout all of this time, I was still trying to exercise and manage my bulimia. That because the pressure was unrelenting, my decision after that was not to stop, but was to not get caught. So the
Hmm.
decision after that was not, oh, I had chosen to get in trouble. It was that I just wasn't going to get caught next time.
Hmm. Did that work out? Did you have any other further issues for the remainder of your time?
I had some tense moments with officers where I was openly belligerent, and I could have lost a lot more. I don't know why I didn't. I know I kind of had another officer one time say, like, Winner, anybody would be fucking stupid to mess with you because you have a halo around you. But there were officers that really, really didn't like me. And I don't know what it was. It just some kind of immense privilege that during some of my worst moments, I really was kind of a menace and got away with it.
Hmm. So because you chose not to focus on your release date or anything, did your end stages of your confinement, did that come up, kind of sneak up on you a little bit? Like, were you suddenly just 2 weeks out from your release before you realized it, for example?
It was. And obviously, when the time comes, you have to sign the piece of paper given to you because your probation starts and stuff like that. And you
Mm.
have to choose your transition house as close to home as you can get. However, this is how far gone I was in my mentality. My release date was on a Thursday, and I had signed for that Thursday. Then I was called back to my counselor's office and told, because of COVID quarantine processes for receiving new inmates at your halfway house only receives inmates on Wednesdays. My release date was on a Thursday. Instead of sending me to that transition housing one day sooner, I'm still in federal custody, by the way. That transition housing was part of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. I'm not being released. But because that release day was one day earlier, they pushed it to the next Wednesday. And so I had counted those 6 days of extra in prison time that I was going to have to do. And I was so far gone that in my mind, that was a whole disciplinary report that I could have earned. You know, they make you spend an extra 6 days in prison, 6 to 7 days in prison, usually because of a fight. You know, those days were taken away from me because of a quarantine COVID technicality, but I really could have earned those days off by beating the shit out of somebody. And so in my mind, I didn't see a difference. I lost those days regardless. And I mean, that is the person that walked out of that prison. I was 100% still that person when I came home.
Golly. How was that adjustment? I mean, how long did it take you to start, leaving that mentality behind to a certain extent and kind of, reintegrating with your closest family members?
I wasn't fully myself again till maybe I came home June 9th, 2021. I didn't feel like myself again till December. We had a lot of people coming in and visiting and wanting to film and the interviews. And so I knew when to turn it on. But the family relations were falling apart. I immediately got in a toxic relationship with an old ex. And my mom read the memoir about a week and a half ago. And she still hasn't asked me about the secret marriage to Carlos. And I was so ready at any given time for the government to take things away from me again that I was just hoarding so much for myself and only trying to keep myself from going back in. And because I felt like I was really going to break down, I was going to lose everything about myself if I ever went back to prison, that I was scared and lashing out at my own family. And the one thing that I think kept me together was hoping that on my birthday that year, I was going to get to run a half marathon. And in October 2021, I lost a best friend. She overdosed. And I just remembered, like, I'm going to run. That's what I do when I get sad. I run, and I have a half marathon coming up. And so the day my ankle monitor got cut off, or the week before when I had spoken to my probation officer, and he told me that he would never let me go to San Antonio and that I wasn't running that half marathon. I spiraled all over again. And I don't think I found anything good about me that I liked until I started working again as a coach.
That says you're a CrossFit coach now?
Yes, I still coach at that same gym.
Oh, wow. Okay, so you've been there quite some time now. Fantastic. So, do you feel like you're on a positive path right now? If you've been coaching there for a while and other things going on in your life, I mean, do you feel like you're moving forward and reaching toward goals once again after all of this?
Yes, and I think a few months ago I actually had like not a tantrum, but it was a tantrum to my publisher's PR manager, because we've obviously waited 2 years for this book, for this moment that this book would get published, and that, rehashing all of this that I had been through. When I'm at work, I'm just Coach Ree, right? I don't even use my name. I go by Ree Davis at work. And that in the meantime, I have gone back to college and I'm in a very exclusive veterinary technology program that is actually more difficult than anything I've ever done before, even in the military. And so I told my publisher, like, we waited 2 years for this book and I moved on. I'm not Reality Winner. Like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to go on tour for this book. Like, I'm in this vet tech program. This is what matters to me right now. And, I waited long enough for this book to come out, but I've already moved on. And it's not fair to me that I have so many positive things in my life now that we have to go back to this.
Mm-hmm.
I've been very angry about it, to be honest.
Really? Wow. Wow. I didn't expect that, honestly, but I can see how writing the book maybe is also kind of closing the book on it for you.
Exactly. I wanted this to be the end all be all. And again, in this program, this is not who I am. This is history. We don't talk about it. Most people don't know about it. That's how small this town is. These people don't know anything about this. And, even in my hometown, if somebody recognizes me, it's because they want to ask how my mom and my sister are doing. So it's like living in two worlds. I feel like Hannah Montana to have to do these interviews and do these press releases when I'm about to go into class in about 30 minutes and go back to being a complete nobody.
I can understand how that would be a breath of fresh air for you. So you do not like frequently get recognized in the grocery store or anything like that anymore?
No, if anything, people see the shirt and they're like, I see you running up and down the street all the time. Do you go to CrossFit Kingsville? And I'm like, yeah, kind of. Kind of. I kind of go there.
Good. Yeah, it sounds like you're on a positive path right now, and I'm very happy to hear that. And hopefully you can, put this entire, I don't even know, I couldn't call it an episode. That's kind of diminishes all of it, of course, but put behind this chapter of your life, and move forward some positive things. So you're focused right now on finishing school. Do you plan to stay in the area where you are right now? Like, have you kind of made a home there at this point?
Yes. 30 something years ago, when my parents had moved down here, we had actually always been sitting on the same 20 acres of land, and it's just always been home base for us. And my intention is to finish school and work on repairing my credit score so that I can buy my parents' land and their house from them. And I just want to stay in my hometown. I'm not really sure what this degree is going to do for me. As a convicted felon, I cannot get a license to be a certified vet tech. There are still clinics in the area that will hire. Texas is one of few states that do not require a license to work in a clinic. But I am also connected in my city, and I would love to work for animal control someday as well. Rescuing dogs is kind of my new passion in life. It feels very small, but when you have a criminal record and like you're literally not even trusted to work retail, like Walmart didn't even call back. I'm gonna do what feels right and what I can help. And so like right now we've got 9 dogs, and I've got 2 new rescue puppies that we're working with. And I have my own dogs, of course, which are a hot mess. But they, in this tumultuous time, like going through Trump 2.0, every day, every month, I'm like, in 2017, I only made it 4 months into his presidency before I committed a felony. So right now I beat my record. We're 6 months in, haven't committed any crime. And I have an extremely reactive, aggressive dog that I am the only person in the world that she loves. And if I go to prison, I don't know what's going to happen to her. So she keeps me out of jail.
Oh my gosh. Wow. So she's rescuing you too. That's fantastic.
Exactly.
Good. Well, Reality, this has been incredible conversation. I really appreciate it. And I was so grateful for the opportunity to read your book before it came out as well. For the listeners, if you want to read it as well, the book is I Am Not Your Enemy, and it's out on Tuesday the 16th. So if you're listening to this on Monday when it first comes out, you can pick up the book tomorrow, and it will be in major bookstores. And you can also see the documentary, which Reality, I guess you have not seen the documentary about yourself. Is that right?
I have not.
Yeah, I can understand that. I mean, you lived it and you were, did the interviews and everything, so you don't necessarily need to revisit in that sense. But it's quite striking. It's very interesting. And there are 2 films as well. I've seen all 3 at this point and read her books. So I can highly recommend all of the different forms of media, honestly, about her. So hopefully you'll get something out of it as well, because there's always more to her story than what we can just talk about in an hour or 2 here on the podcast. Reality, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Do you have any social media profiles or website or anything if people want to follow along with you personally after all of this?
Yes, I am very much active on Instagram. It's at Reazlepuff, ReazlePuff. I post every single day about my dogs, and that's it.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm glad I found you on there as well. That was really lucky for me, because until I saw your account profile, I wasn't aware that the book was coming out. So that was kind of a stroke of luck for me at the very least. So follow along. She's got a new chapter of her life that she's writing as we speak, as a matter of fact. Reality, once again, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
Of course. Take care. If you're interested in more of Spycraft 101, look for my page on Instagram at Spycraft 101. You can also find more great articles on my website, spycraft101.com. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you'll stick around because there's lots more to come.
Disclaimer. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. The stories and statements expressed herein are experiences and opinions. They may not reflect the views of the host or the production studio. It's okay if you disagree with our content. No piece of media is right for everyone. If you love Spycraft 101, please check us out online, on Instagram, on YouTube, and especially on Patreon. Thank you for listening.